I didn't help you for money, sir. The little boy gently pushed the crisp $100 bill back toward the old man. The wind cut through the streets of East Cleveland, Ohio, carrying the bitter cold of late November with it. The boy's hands were shaking. His lips had lost most of their color. He hadn't eaten in almost 2 days. The old man frowned. You carried my groceries all the way home. Yes, sir. You deserve this. The boy smiled politely and slowly shook his head. I didn't help you for money. For a brief moment, neither of them moved. The old man's hand remained frozen in the air, still holding the $100 bill. The boy simply nodded once, turned around, and started walking away. 5, 6, 7 steps. Then he stopped. Not because he had changed his mind. Because his empty stomach cramped so sharply that he had to press one hand against it. He closed his eyes. Took a slow breath. Then kept walking. Without looking back. The old man couldn't move. 53 years disappeared in an instant. Because he had once been that hungry little boy. And he had once spoken almost those exact same words. I didn't help her for money. That memory had never left him. It had simply been waiting for another cold afternoon like this one. 20 minutes earlier. Emmett Weatherby sat quietly outside Miller's Bakery on Euclid Avenue. He always chose the same bench near the front window because customers rarely noticed him there. His backpack rested beside his feet, and his hands stayed tucked inside sleeves that had become too short months ago. He wasn't asking anyone for food. He wasn't holding a cardboard sign. He wasn't approaching customers. He simply waited. Inside the bakery, people laughed over hot coffee and fresh cinnamon rolls. The warm smell drifted outside every time someone opened the front door. Emmett swallowed. His stomach answered with another painful growl. A young couple finished their sandwiches and stood up. For just a second, hope appeared in his eyes. Half a turkey sandwich still rested on their tray. Maybe. The woman picked up the tray. Walked toward the trash can. Then stopped. She looked at the sandwich. Shrugged. Dropped it into the garbage. Emmett quietly looked away. He never liked watching food disappear. Especially now. A bakery employee stepped outside carrying a broom. He noticed Emmett immediately. Kid. Emmett stood up before the man could say anything else. I'm sorry. I wasn't bothering anybody. The employee sighed. I know. But customers don't like seeing kids hanging around the entrance. Emmett nodded. I understand. He picked up his backpack without arguing. No anger. No complaint. Just another place he wasn't allowed to stay. Across the street, an elderly man wearing a dark wool coat watched the entire exchange through the window of a small grocery store. He didn't interfere. He simply observed. There was something familiar about the boy. Not his face. His pride. Minutes later, the elderly man left the grocery store carrying 2 heavy paper bags and a thick folder filled with documents. As he stepped off the curb, one of the grocery bags split open. Canned food rolled across the sidewalk. The folder slipped from beneath his arm. Papers scattered into the street as a cold gust of wind swept through the intersection. Drivers slowed. No one stopped. People walked around the mess without breaking stride. Then someone ran. Not toward the bakery. Toward the old man. Emmett dropped his backpack onto the sidewalk and chased after the blowing papers before they disappeared beneath passing cars. He gathered every page carefully, straightened each corner, then picked up the scattered groceries one by one. Within moments, everything had been neatly stacked back inside the remaining bag. The old man looked at him. You didn't have to do that. Emmett smiled. My grandma always said that if somebody drops their burden, you help them carry it. The old man studied him for a long moment. There was kindness. There was dignity. And there was hunger. He could see all three. Very quietly, he asked. Would you mind helping me carry these home? Emmett lifted the heavier bag before answering. Of course, sir. He never asked where they were going. He never asked whether he'd be paid. He simply started walking beside a stranger. Looking back now, I've often noticed that life rarely announces its biggest turning points with fanfare. Sometimes they begin with something as ordinary as a grocery bag breaking open on a cold sidewalk. In that simple moment, neither the hungry little boy nor the lonely old man understood that they were both carrying something far heavier than groceries. One carried years of quiet hardship. The other carried a memory that had never stopped waiting for its way back home. Emmett walked beside the old man without saying much. The paper grocery bag rested comfortably against his shoulder, even though it was heavier than it looked. Every few steps, the old man glanced sideways, almost expecting the boy to complain or ask how much farther they had to go. He never did. The sidewalks of East Cleveland were lined with bare maple trees, their branches swaying gently in the icy wind. Traffic hummed in the distance, but neither of them seemed in any hurry. After several minutes, the old man finally spoke. My name's Gordon. Emmett smiled politely. I'm Emmett, sir. It's nice to meet you. Likewise. There was another stretch of silence. Not uncomfortable. Simply quiet. Gordon noticed something unusual. Most children talked. They asked questions. They pointed at things. This little boy simply walked beside him as though helping strangers was the most ordinary thing in the world. Finally Gordon asked. How old are you? 10. And you're not in school today? I was. I came after class. Gordon nodded. So you're just heading home? Emmett hesitated. A little later. The answer caught Gordon's attention. It wasn't a lie. But it wasn't the whole truth either. As they continued walking, they passed another small diner. Warm light spilled onto the sidewalk, carrying the smell of fresh chili and cornbread into the cold evening air. Emmett's stomach growled so loudly that even he looked embarrassed. I'm sorry, he whispered. Gordon pretended not to notice. Instead, he changed the subject. You seem like a very polite young man. My grandma says good manners don't cost anything. And your parents? The smile disappeared from Emmett's face. My mom passed away 3 years ago. I'm sorry. So am I. And your father? Emmett looked down at the sidewalk. He has a lot of problems. Gordon didn't ask another question. He had learned long ago that people usually revealed more when they weren't being interrogated. A few more blocks passed. Finally they reached a modest brick duplex with a small porch. Gordon accepted the grocery bag and carefully placed it beside the front steps. You've been a tremendous help. He reached into his wallet. Emmett immediately recognized what was coming. A crisp $100 bill appeared between Gordon's fingers. For a 10-year-old boy who hadn't eaten in nearly 2 days, it looked almost unreal. Gordon held it toward him. Please. You've earned it. Emmett looked at the money for several long seconds. His eyes didn't sparkle. His breathing didn't change. Instead, he slowly pushed Gordon's hand back. No, sir. Gordon frowned. Why not? Because you needed help. So? My grandma always said kindness isn't something you sell. Gordon stared at him. But you're hungry. I know. You could buy food. I know. You could buy a warm coat. I know. Then why? Emmett smiled with quiet sincerity. I didn't help you for money. The words landed harder than Gordon expected. He tried once more. Please. No, sir. If I take it now. Emmett paused before finishing. It'll feel like I only helped because I hoped you'd pay me. He gently folded Gordon's fingers back around the bill. Thank you anyway. Then he adjusted the worn straps of his backpack and started walking away. He never looked back. After only a few steps, a sharp wave of hunger forced him to stop. He pressed one hand against his stomach, closed his eyes, waited for the pain to pass, then kept walking into the freezing afternoon without turning around a single time. Gordon remained standing beside his porch. The $100 bill still rested in his hand. He wasn't looking at the money anymore. He was watching the little boy disappear down the sidewalk. 53 years earlier, on another freezing afternoon in another forgotten neighborhood, a frightened boy with empty pockets had refused payment for helping an elderly widow carry firewood into her house. That frightened boy had been Gordon Pennington. He had almost forgotten the sound of his own voice until this very moment. Almost. Very quietly, he whispered to himself. It can't be. Then he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out his phone, and made a single call. Stanley. There was a long pause. I need you to find that boy. And whatever you do, don't let him know we're looking. Stanley Vaughn had worked for Gordon Pennington for almost 30 years. He had driven governors, senators, judges, and business leaders across the Midwest, yet he had never heard his employer sound quite like he had on that phone call. I need you to find that boy. No explanation. No business meeting. No deadline. Just those 7 words. The following afternoon, Stanley parked his aging sedan across the street from Miller's Bakery. Gordon had instructed him not to interfere. Just watch. And don't let him know. Stanley wasn't sure what Gordon expected to find. Within an hour, he understood. At exactly 3:27 every afternoon, Emmett walked out of Roosevelt Elementary carrying the same worn backpack. He smiled politely at his teacher before heading downtown. Several classmates ran toward waiting parents. Others climbed onto school buses. Emmett walked alone. He stopped first at the public library. Not to stay warm. To finish his homework. Nearly an hour later, he packed away his notebook, thanked the librarian, and walked toward Miller's Bakery. Stanley checked his watch. 4:48 p.m. The routine was almost identical to the day before. Emmett sat quietly on the same bench. Never asked anyone for food. Never approached customers. Never even looked directly at people carrying fresh bread. He simply waited. A businessman walked out carrying 2 coffee cups. One slipped from the cardboard tray and rolled beneath a parked car. Before the man even noticed, Emmett stood, picked it up carefully, and handed it back. Thank you, buddy. The man reached into his pocket. Emmett smiled. No, thank you, sir. Then he sat back down. 20 minutes later, an elderly woman struggled to open the bakery door while balancing a walker. Emmett hurried over, held the door open, and waited until she stepped inside safely. She reached for her purse. He shook his head before she could offer anything. It's okay, ma'am. Stanley slowly lowered the notebook he had been writing in. This wasn't luck. It wasn't coincidence. This was who the boy was. Then something happened that Gordon could never have predicted. A homeless veteran slowly approached the bench carrying an old military backpack. His hands trembled from the cold. He asked no one for money. He simply sat down. A bakery employee stepped outside carrying a paper bag. Here, kid. We had one left. Inside was a turkey sandwich and a warm blueberry muffin. Stanley smiled. Finally. The boy was going to eat. Emmett looked at the food for several seconds. His fingers tightened around the warm paper bag. Then he turned toward the elderly veteran. Would you like to split it with me? The old man stared at him. You sure? Emmett nodded. I'm hungry. But you look hungrier. Without another word, he tore the sandwich exactly in half and handed over the larger piece. Not the smaller. The larger. The veteran quietly accepted it. Neither of them spoke while eating. Stanley sat frozen inside his car. He had watched executives donate millions of dollars during televised charity galas. Yet somehow, this felt bigger. Much bigger. That evening, Stanley returned to Gordon's home. Gordon was waiting beside the fireplace. "You found him." "I did." "And?" Stanley remained silent for several seconds. Finally he said, "Sir, I think you were wrong." Gordon looked up. Stanley smiled softly. "You said you wanted me to find out whether that boy deserved your help." He slowly placed his notebook on the table. "I don't think that's the question anymore." Gordon frowned. "What is?" Stanley looked directly into his employer's eyes. "I think the real question is whether we deserve the chance to help a boy like him." The room fell completely silent. Gordon opened Stanley's notebook. Every page contained careful observations. Times. Places. Small acts of kindness. Not once had the boy asked anyone for anything. Gordon reached the final page. There, Stanley had written only one sentence. "Some children survive because the world is kind to them. This one has stayed kind, even when the world hasn't been kind to him." Gordon closed the notebook without saying a word. Then he walked to the window and looked out into the cold November night. Very quietly, he whispered, "Beatrice, I think I've found another one." The next morning, Gordon Pennington did something that surprised everyone who had worked with him for decades. He canceled 3 board meetings. He postponed a television interview. He even asked his executive assistant not to schedule anything for the rest of the day. Stanley watched quietly as Gordon closed the leather folder that usually contained merger contracts worth millions of dollars. "This isn't business anymore," Gordon said softly. "This is personal." By noon, they were parked outside Roosevelt Elementary. Not to meet Emmett. Just to watch. School let out at exactly 3:15. Children poured through the front doors laughing, chasing one another toward waiting parents and yellow school buses. Then Emmett appeared. His backpack looked even older in the afternoon sunlight. One shoulder strap had been stitched together with blue fishing line. His sneakers were nearly worn through at the toes. Yet he walked with his head high. Not proudly. Simply without self-pity. Stanley noticed something Gordon immediately noticed as well. Every teacher greeted Emmett by name. Every one. "Have a good evening, Emmett. See you tomorrow. Great job on your science quiz." He answered every teacher the same way. "Thank you, ma'am." "Thank you, sir." There wasn't a trace of bitterness in his voice. Gordon smiled faintly. "A child like that doesn't raise himself." Stanley nodded. Someone taught him well. Instead of following Emmett this time, Gordon walked into the school office. A receptionist welcomed him politely. "Can I help you?" "My name is Gordon Pennington. I'm hoping to speak with someone about one of your students." Within minutes, they were sitting inside the principal's office. Principal Denise Harper listened carefully as Gordon explained that he had recently met Emmett through an unexpected encounter. He deliberately left out the part about the $100 bill. He wasn't looking for admiration. He was looking for truth. Principal Harper folded her hands. "If you're asking whether Emmett is a good student." She smiled. "He's one of the finest children we've ever had." Gordon remained silent. She continued. "He never complains. He never causes trouble. And somehow, he's always the first student volunteering to help another child." She opened a folder. Straight A's. Perfect attendance until recently. Gordon looked up. "Until recently?" She sighed. "He's missed several mornings this month. We've been concerned." "Have you spoken with his family?" "We've tried." Another pause. "His grandmother answered every call until about 2 weeks ago." "And then?" No one answered again. Gordon exchanged a quiet glance with Stanley. The pieces were beginning to move. The school nurse entered after Principal Harper asked her to join them. Without realizing how important her words would become, she quietly said, "Emmett always says he's already eaten breakfast." But... She hesitated. "I don't think that's true." Gordon leaned forward slightly. "Why?" The nurse opened a small notebook. "I've learned to recognize hungry children. They drink extra water. They move more slowly. They try not to look at other students' lunches." Her voice softened. "Emmett does all three." Stanley looked toward the window. Neither man spoke. Then the nurse added something that settled heavily over the room. "Last Thursday, I offered him an extra sandwich. He thanked me. But he asked if he could take it home instead." Gordon quietly asked, "Did he?" She nodded. "He told me. Someone else needs it more than I do." Silence filled the office. No one reached for coffee. No one looked at their phones. Finally Gordon asked the question that had been growing in his mind since yesterday. "Can you tell me about his family?" Principal Harper took a slow breath. "His mother passed away several years ago. His grandmother raised him. But she suffered a severe stroke last week. She's currently living at Maple Grove Care Center." "And his father?" The principal's expression changed. "We honestly don't know where he is most days. We've filed several welfare concerns over the years. But without enough evidence." She stopped herself. The system moves slowly. Gordon lowered his eyes. He had spent decades believing that wealth could solve almost any problem. For the first time in many years, he realized money wasn't what this little boy needed first. He needed someone willing to stay long enough to uncover the truth. Looking back now, I've often realized that kindness alone isn't always enough to change a life. Sometimes kindness must be patient enough to investigate, courageous enough to face uncomfortable truths, and determined enough to keep showing up long after the first emotional moment has passed. Gordon wasn't searching for a child to rescue anymore. He was searching for the truth, because only the truth could give that little boy a future no amount of money could ever buy. 3 days later, Stanley pulled his sedan into a parking lot across from Maple Grove Care Center just after sunrise. A cold mist still clung to the streets, and the nursing home looked almost hidden behind rows of bare oak trees. Gordon stepped out first, carrying nothing but a small leather folder. "No cameras," he said quietly. "No gifts. No announcements." Stanley nodded. They weren't there as wealthy benefactors. They were there as two men searching for the truth. Inside the nursing home, a receptionist led them to room 214. Margaret Weatherby sat beside the window with a knitted blanket across her lap. The stroke had weakened the right side of her body, but her eyes remained bright and alert. When Gordon entered, she immediately looked nervous. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "If this is about unpaid bills, my son promised he'd..." She stopped speaking. Even she didn't seem to believe the sentence she had almost finished. Gordon gently pulled up a chair. "My name is Gordon Pennington. I'm not here about money." Margaret looked confused. "Then, why are you here?" He smiled. "I'm here because your grandson helped an old man carry groceries." For several seconds, Margaret simply stared at him. Then tears quietly filled her eyes. "I knew he would." She whispered those words with complete certainty. Not surprise. Certainty. Gordon leaned forward. "You weren't surprised?" Margaret slowly shook her head. "That's how I raised him." She smiled faintly. "When his mother passed away, he was only 7. I told him something every night before bed." "What was that?" "If someone drops a burden, you help them carry it." Gordon lowered his eyes. Those were almost the exact words Emmett had spoken on the sidewalk. Margaret reached toward the small nightstand beside her bed. "There. Would you hand me that wooden box?" Stanley carefully placed the old cedar box into her lap. The brass latch had nearly worn smooth after years of use. Inside were neatly folded report cards, elementary school drawings, church certificates, and dozens of handwritten notes. Every single one had been saved. Margaret picked up the oldest drawing. It showed a little stick figure holding another child's hand. He was 6. His teacher asked the class to draw a superhero. Gordon smiled. He drew himself helping someone. No. Margaret laughed gently. He drew his grandfather. My husband believed kindness was something children learned by watching. Her smile slowly faded. After he died, I tried to keep teaching Emmett the same thing. Stanley quietly flipped through another stack. Every teacher wrote almost identical comments. Kind. Respectful. Helpful. Honest. Works hard. Shares with classmates. One envelope caught Gordon's attention. It had never been opened. Margaret noticed him looking. That arrived after my stroke. I haven't been able to open it. Gordon carefully unfolded the letter. It was from Roosevelt Elementary. The first paragraph praised Emmett's academic progress. The second made Gordon's heart sink. The school was concerned about increasing absences and repeated signs of food insecurity. They were requesting an urgent meeting with his legal guardian. Margaret closed her eyes. I never saw that. I couldn't answer the phone anymore. My son. Her voice broke. He never answers. Silence settled over the room. Finally Gordon asked the question he had been avoiding. Does Emmett have anyone besides you? Margaret looked toward the window. My son is still his legal parent. She hesitated. But being someone's father, and being someone's safe place, aren't always the same thing. Before Gordon could respond, the room door suddenly opened. A nurse stepped inside carrying medication. She stopped when she recognized Gordon Pennington. Oh. I've seen you on television. Margaret looked surprised. You know him? The nurse smiled. Everyone in Ohio knows Mr. Pennington. Margaret slowly turned back toward Gordon. You never told me. Gordon gently interrupted her. Today isn't about who I am. It's about who your grandson is. Margaret reached across the blanket and squeezed his hand with surprising strength. Then promise me something. If you discover he's in trouble, please, don't look away. Gordon held her gaze for several long seconds. Then, with quiet conviction, he answered. I won't. Neither of them realized that less than 24 hours later, Stanley would witness something on a downtown street that would transform quiet concern into undeniable proof, and the question would no longer be whether Emmett needed help. It would become how quickly they could save him before another cold Ohio winter stole far more than his childhood. Stanley almost missed it. At first, it looked like nothing more than another busy Friday afternoon in downtown East Cleveland. Cars crawled through the intersection as the traffic light changed. Office workers hurried home with their collars pulled high against the freezing wind. Parents picked up children from nearby schools. Then he saw Emmett. The little boy wasn't walking toward Miller's bakery this time. He was standing alone near the entrance of a convenience store. A small piece of cardboard rested against his backpack. It wasn't covered with desperate words. It simply read. Anything helps. Thank you. Stanley's heart sank. He had watched the boy for nearly a week. This was the first time he had ever seen him asking strangers for help. He immediately reached for the small camera Gordon had asked him to keep in the glove compartment. Not to shame anyone. To document the truth. 5 minutes passed. Most people walked by without looking. One woman handed Emmett $2. The little boy smiled warmly. Thank you, ma'am. God bless you. He carefully folded the bills and slipped them into his coat pocket. He never reached toward anyone. He never followed anyone. He simply waited. Then Stanley noticed something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Across the street, a rusty pickup truck was parked beside the curb. Inside sat a man in his early 40s. Unshaven. Wearing a stained brown jacket. Watching only one person. Emmett. Stanley quietly zoomed the camera. The man's eyes never left the boy. Another 10 minutes passed. An elderly veteran dropped $5 into Emmett's hand before disappearing into the crowd. Less than 30 seconds later, the man climbed out of the pickup. He crossed the street with quick, determined steps. Emmett saw him coming. The smile vanished from his face. Without saying a word, he reached into his pocket and handed over every dollar he had collected. The man counted it. His expression hardened. That's it? Stanley couldn't hear every word from inside the car, but he could clearly see the exchange. The man pointed back toward the intersection. His finger jabbed sharply through the air. Emmett quietly lowered his head. The man spoke again. Longer this time. Faster. Then he grabbed the front of the boy's worn jacket, leaned close enough that only Emmett could hear him, and finally shoved the crumpled bills into his own pocket before walking back toward the pickup. Emmett remained exactly where he was. He didn't cry. He didn't chase after him. He simply took one slow breath. Straightened the cardboard sign. And returned to the exact same spot. As though nothing had happened. Stanley lowered the camera. His hands were trembling. He already knew who the man was. The school had mentioned him. Margaret had spoken about him with quiet heartbreak. This was Daniel Weatherby, Emmett's father. For another hour Stanley continued watching. The pattern repeated itself twice more. Every dollar the boy received, his father collected. Near sunset, Emmett finally stopped. Not because he wanted to. Because no one else was stopping. Daniel motioned toward the truck. Emmett climbed into the passenger seat. The truck pulled away. Stanley followed from a distance. They drove into an aging neighborhood where abandoned houses stood beside homes that families still fought to maintain. Daniel parked outside a weathered duplex with broken porch railings. Instead of going inside, he walked directly to a liquor store on the corner. Emmett remained alone in the truck. Waiting. 20 minutes later Daniel returned carrying 2 plastic bags. Neither contained groceries. Stanley closed his eyes. He didn't need to guess what was inside. That evening, Gordon watched every second of the recorded footage. Not once did he interrupt. Not once did he speak. The room remained silent until the final frame faded to black. Stanley finally broke the silence. "Sir. I think we have enough." Gordon slowly shook his head. "No." Stanley looked surprised. "We have enough to know the boy is suffering." He placed one hand on the paused video, where Emmett stood holding the cardboard sign in the bitter cold. "But suffering isn't enough. We need proof that the system can't ignore." Stanley frowned. "What are you going to do?" Gordon looked out the window toward the snow beginning to fall across the city. For the first time since meeting Emmett, there was steel in his voice. "I'm going to stop watching. And start building the case that will save his life. Looking back, I've learned that compassion often begins with tears, but lasting change begins with evidence. A broken heart may inspire us to act, yet only truth carefully gathered can protect the vulnerable when emotions fade and difficult questions begin." Gordon understood that rescuing Emmett would require more than generosity. It would require patience, courage, and the willingness to fight for a child whose quiet dignity deserved far more than sympathy. Stanley expected Gordon to call a lawyer first. Instead, Gordon asked him to drive back to the neighborhood where Emmett lived. Not to confront Daniel. Not yet. "I want to see where the boy sleeps," Gordon said quietly. "If we're going to change his life, we need to understand the life he's trying to survive." Just after sunset, they parked half a block away from the weathered duplex. Only one light burned inside. The curtains never moved. The house looked tired, as though it had been giving up one winter at a time. For nearly 40 minutes, nothing happened. Then the front door flew open. Daniel Weatherby stumbled onto the porch. Even from across the street, Stanley could tell he had been drinking. His movements were careless. His voice carried through the cold air. "Where is it?" Emmett stood silently near the doorway. "I gave you everything." Daniel stepped closer. "I said, where is it?" The little boy slowly reached into his backpack and removed 3 quarters and a few pennies. "I found these under the truck seat." Daniel snatched the coins from his hand. Stanley instinctively reached for the door handle. Gordon stopped him with one hand. "Not yet." "But sir, if we interfere now, he'll disappear tomorrow." Stanley clenched his jaw. Every instinct told him to walk across the street. Instead, he forced himself to stay still. Daniel shoved the loose change into his pocket. "You think this feeds us?" Emmett answered so quietly that Stanley could barely hear him. "I know it doesn't." Daniel laughed bitterly. "Then you'll stay out longer tomorrow." He turned toward the kitchen. As he opened the refrigerator, the light briefly illuminated the inside. Stanley leaned forward. There was almost nothing there. Half a carton of milk. A bottle of mustard. 1 can of beans. Nothing else. Daniel grabbed neither. Instead, he pulled a brown paper bag from the counter and disappeared into the living room. A few minutes later, the television grew louder. Emmett remained standing in the kitchen. Alone. He quietly opened one cabinet. Empty. Another. Empty. Finally, he found a nearly stale sleeve of saltine crackers with only 4 pieces left. He looked toward the living room. Then carefully broke the crackers into 2 piles. 1 pile with 3 crackers. 1 pile with 1. He wrapped the larger pile inside a napkin and slipped it into his backpack. The last cracker. He ate slowly. Not because he wanted to make it last. Because he wanted to pretend it was enough. Stanley's eyes filled. "He's saving tomorrow's breakfast." Gordon didn't answer. His gaze never left the kitchen window. Suddenly, headlights swept across the front yard. A faded county vehicle pulled into the driveway. A woman wearing a county social services jacket stepped onto the porch carrying a clipboard. Stanley straightened. This could be it. Gordon remained silent. Daniel opened the door with an exaggerated smile. His posture changed instantly. His words became friendly. His movements became careful. From inside the house, Stanley watched the performance unfold. Daniel laughed. Nodded. Invited the caseworker inside. Emmett stood exactly where he was. Still. Quiet. Invisible. The visit lasted less than 15 minutes. When the county worker left, Daniel waited until her car disappeared around the corner. Then the smile vanished. He slammed the front door hard enough to rattle the windows. "So, you think they're going to save you?" Emmett lowered his eyes. "I didn't say anything." "You don't have to." Daniel pointed toward the hallway. "Go to bed." Without another word, Emmett picked up his backpack and walked toward his small bedroom. As he disappeared from view, Gordon finally spoke. His voice was calm. Almost too calm. The system looked. It didn't see. Stanley nodded slowly. "What now?" Gordon reached into his coat and pulled out a business card. "Not to give away. To look at." On the back, in faded blue ink, someone had written more than 50 years earlier. "One honest child is worth fighting for. Beatrice Holloway." Gordon slipped the card back into his wallet. Then he looked at Stanley. "Tomorrow morning. We're not watching anymore. We're building a team." For the first time since this journey began, Gordon stopped thinking like a businessman searching for answers. He started thinking like a man preparing for a battle. And somewhere inside that quiet little house, a 10-year-old boy went to sleep believing that tomorrow would look exactly like today. He had no idea that before another week had passed, people he had never met would begin fighting for the future he had long ago stopped expecting. The conference room overlooked downtown Cleveland, but no one sitting around the polished walnut table was paying attention to the skyline. A thick file rested in the center. Across the front, Gordon had written only 4 words. Emmett Weatherby. Age 10. No company logos. No financial projections. No investment reports. Just the name of one little boy. Around the table sat family attorney Rebecca Holloway, retired juvenile court judge Harold Whitmore, Stanley Vaughn, principal Denise Harper, and the director of Maple Grove Care Center. Gordon looked around the room. I didn't ask you here because I'm wealthy. I asked because every one of you knows something the others don't. Rebecca opened the file first. Inside were school attendance records. Teacher observations. Photographs. Medical notes. Stanley's videos. Every page revealed another piece of Emmett's life. No single document looked shocking. Together, they painted a heartbreaking picture. Judge Whitmore quietly adjusted his glasses. This isn't one incident. No. Rebecca nodded. This is a pattern. Principal Harper slid another folder across the table. I've kept copies of every email we ever sent regarding welfare concerns. She hesitated. There were 7. No one ever followed up. The nursing home director spoke next. Margaret Weatherby asks about her grandson every single day. She still believes her son is taking care of him. The room fell silent. Finally Gordon looked toward Rebecca. What are our options? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she carefully organized the papers before speaking. We do this correctly. Or we risk making everything worse. Stanley frowned. Worse? If Daniel believes someone is trying to remove Emmett, he could disappear with the boy before the court ever sees this evidence. Everyone understood what she meant. This could not become an emotional confrontation. It had to become an airtight legal case. Rebecca continued. We'll need independent documentation. School. Medical. Nursing home. Police. County services. And your recordings. She looked toward Stanley. Every timestamp matters. Every date matters. Every witness matters. Gordon slowly nodded. Then we gather everything. Over the next several days, the team worked quietly. Teachers documented missed breakfasts and unexplained absences. The school counselor recorded conversations that had previously seemed insignificant. The nurse submitted reports describing repeated signs of hunger. Maple Grove released Margaret's medical records with her written consent, confirming that she had been physically incapable of caring for Emmett since her stroke. Stanley organized every video in chronological order. One clip showed Daniel collecting money from Emmett. Another showed him leaving the boy outside in freezing temperatures while he disappeared into a liquor store. A third captured Emmett waiting alone inside the pickup truck for nearly an hour. Piece by piece, the truth stopped looking like opinion. It became evidence. Then came the final surprise. Rebecca received a phone call from a county caseworker. I've reviewed older files. There were reports going back almost 4 years. Rebecca leaned forward. How many? 12. 12 separate welfare referrals. Some anonymous. Some from neighbors. Some from teachers. One from a church volunteer. None had contained enough evidence by themselves. Together, they told the same story. That evening, Gordon sat alone in his study. The old $100 bill still rested inside a small picture frame on his desk. He looked at it for a long time. Then he quietly picked up the faded business card Beatrice Holloway had given him more than half a century earlier. On the back she had once written, "When kindness becomes responsibility, don't stop halfway." Gordon closed his eyes. He finally understood what she had meant. Helping someone through one difficult afternoon was kindness. Helping them build a different future required responsibility. The following morning, Rebecca walked into the county courthouse carrying 3 thick binders. She didn't ask for favors. She didn't mention Gordon's name. She simply placed the evidence before the clerk and requested an emergency review based on documented concerns for a child's welfare. As the paperwork disappeared behind the courthouse doors, no one celebrated. Not Gordon. Not Stanley. Not Rebecca. Because they all understood the same difficult truth. The hardest part of saving Emmett Weatherby had never been finding him. The hardest part was proving, carefully and lawfully, that a quiet little boy who never complained had been asking for help all along without saying a single word. Looking back, I've often wondered how many children hide extraordinary courage behind ordinary silence. The loudest cries are not always the ones that need us most. Sometimes the deepest suffering leaves almost no sound at all, and that is precisely why good people must learn to notice what others overlook. Justice begins long before a courtroom. It begins the moment someone decides that another person's quiet pain is worth paying attention to. Rebecca Holloway had spent 34 years practicing family law. She had represented frightened children, exhausted grandparents, foster families, and judges trying to make impossible decisions. Very little surprised her anymore. Daniel Weatherby surprised her. He arrived at the preliminary hearing nearly 40 minutes late, wearing a wrinkled flannel shirt beneath an old leather jacket. He wasn't nervous. He looked irritated. As though the court had interrupted something more important. Emmett sat quietly beside the court-appointed child advocate. His feet barely touched the floor. He never looked toward his father. Not once. Gordon remained in the back row. He wasn't there as a billionaire. He wasn't there as a rescuer. He was simply another observer until the court decided otherwise. When Daniel finally entered the courtroom, his eyes immediately found Gordon. For a brief second, recognition flashed across his face. Then he smiled. It wasn't a grateful smile. It was calculating. During a short recess, Daniel walked directly toward Gordon. So, you're the rich guy. Gordon remained calm. I suppose I am. Daniel looked around to make sure no one was standing close enough to hear every word. You've got plenty of money. You want to play hero. Fine. He shrugged. Let's make a deal. Stanley stiffened. Rebecca quietly continued organizing documents without looking up. Daniel leaned closer. You give me 200 grand. I'll sign whatever papers you want. You can have the kid. Silence. Gordon simply stared at him. Daniel mistook that silence for hesitation. I'll even save you legal fees. No court. No lawyers. No drama. 200,000. And he's yours. For several long seconds, no one spoke. Then Gordon answered quietly. I'm not buying a child. Daniel laughed. You think somebody like him is worth more than that? Gordon's voice never changed. I think no child has a price. Daniel's smile slowly disappeared. Then we're done here. He turned to walk away. Then stopped. Without facing Gordon, he said. If I keep custody, you'll never get near him. He walked back toward the courtroom without another word. Stanley took one step forward. I can't believe. Gordon gently raised one hand. No. That's exactly who he is. Inside the courtroom, the hearing resumed. Rebecca presented only a portion of the evidence. This wasn't the final hearing. It was simply enough to establish immediate concern. The judge reviewed attendance records. Medical documentation. Photographs. Witness statements. Stanley's recordings. No one interrupted. No one argued. Finally the judge looked toward Daniel. Mr. Weatherby. Would you like to respond? Daniel leaned back comfortably. My kid has a roof. My kid has clothes. And my kid loves his father. The judge looked toward Emmett. Would you like to say anything? Every adult in the room turned. Emmett slowly stood. His voice remained soft. I don't want anyone to get in trouble. Another pause. He hesitated. I'd like my grandma to know I'm okay. Several people lowered their eyes. Rebecca quietly closed her notebook. She had expected fear. She had expected anger. She had not expected grace. The judge thanked Emmett and asked him to sit down. After reviewing the initial evidence, she issued temporary protective orders preventing Daniel from removing Emmett from the county while the investigation continued. It wasn't the final victory. But it was the first real protection Emmett had ever received. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered around Gordon after recognizing him. Microphones stretched toward his face. Mr. Pennington, are you adopting this child? Is this another philanthropic project? Gordon stopped walking. He looked back through the courthouse doors where Emmett was speaking quietly with his advocate. Then he answered with only one sentence. This isn't about saving a child. It's about finally listening to one. He walked away before anyone could ask another question. Looking back now, I've often realized that character reveals itself most clearly when money fails to solve the problem. Daniel believed every relationship could be negotiated, every promise could be priced, and every person could be bought. Gordon believed exactly the opposite. Some things lose all meaning the moment we put a dollar amount on them. A child's future is one of those things. And on that cold afternoon, everyone inside that courtroom discovered which belief would ultimately endure. The final custody hearing arrived on the first Monday of December. Outside the courthouse, fresh snow covered the sidewalks, softening the noise of downtown Cleveland. Inside, however, every seat in the courtroom was filled. Principal Denise Harper sat beside the school nurse. Margaret Weatherby's wheelchair rested quietly near the front, wrapped in a thick wool blanket after insisting she would not miss this day. Stanley sat beside Gordon. Neither man spoke. Neither needed to. Emmett wore the only suit he owned. It wasn't new. It had been altered by a volunteer from his church. The sleeves were still a little long, but he stood a little taller than he had just 2 weeks earlier. Judge Eleanor Matthews entered the courtroom, reviewed the final reports one last time, and looked toward Daniel Weatherby. Mr. Weatherby, she began calmly, you've had the opportunity to review all submitted evidence. Daniel nodded impatiently. This whole thing is ridiculous. My son belongs with me. Rebecca Holloway slowly rose from her chair. Your Honor, with the court's permission, we'd like to submit one final exhibit. The judge nodded. Stanley carried a television monitor to the center of the courtroom. No dramatic music played. No emotional speeches interrupted the silence. Only video. The first recording showed Emmett standing in freezing weather holding the small cardboard sign. The second showed Daniel walking across the street to collect every dollar the boy had received. The third showed Daniel leaving his son waiting alone inside the truck while he disappeared into the liquor store. The fourth showed timestamps from 5 different days. The same pattern. Again. And again. And again. The courtroom remained completely silent. Judge Matthews removed her glasses and looked directly at Daniel. Do you dispute these recordings? Daniel shifted in his chair. I was teaching him responsibility. Rebecca didn't react. Instead, she quietly placed another folder before the judge. Inside were school attendance records. Medical evaluations. Reports from Child Protective Services. Statements from teachers. Testimony from neighbors. The unopened letter Margaret had never been able to read. Every document told the same story. Not one terrible day. Years of neglect. Judge Matthews looked toward Daniel one final time. Mr. Weatherby. The court offered you substance abuse treatment. You declined. It offered employment assistance. You declined. It offered parenting classes. You declined. It offered supervised visitation while demonstrating progress. You refused. Daniel shrugged. I don't need strangers telling me how to raise my own kid. The judge slowly closed the file. I believe that's the clearest statement you've made today. She turned toward Emmett. Young man. You've shown extraordinary strength. Then she looked toward Gordon. And Mr. Pennington. Thank you for choosing the lawful path instead of the easy one. Finally, she announced her decision. Effective immediately. The court terminates Daniel Weatherby's custodial rights. Temporary legal guardianship is awarded pending final adoption proceedings. For a brief moment. No one moved. Margaret covered her mouth as tears rolled silently down her cheeks. Principal Harper quietly reached for the school nurse's hand. Stanley lowered his head. Even after 30 years beside Gordon, he had rarely seen his employer close his eyes that tightly. Across the room, Emmett remained perfectly still. Judge Matthews smiled gently. You don't have to be brave every second anymore. Only then did the little boy breathe out. A breath that sounded as though he had been holding it for years. Daniel stood abruptly, muttered something under his breath, and walked toward the exit without looking back. He never once turned toward his son. Not once. Emmett watched the courtroom door close. Then he quietly asked the judge one unexpected question. Does this mean my grandma doesn't have to worry anymore? The judge smiled. No. It means you both get to start healing. As everyone slowly stood, Gordon walked over to Emmett. Neither of them spoke immediately. Finally, Gordon reached into his coat pocket. He unfolded the same crisp $100 bill. The one Emmett had refused. I've kept this since the day we met. Emmett smiled. I still don't want it, sir. Gordon laughed softly. I know. He folded it once more and slipped it back into his wallet. I wasn't offering you money. I was reminding myself that the richest investment I ever made was the one a hungry little boy refused. Looking back, I've often wondered why some victories leave us quieter instead of louder. Perhaps it's because true justice doesn't feel like revenge. It feels like relief. On that snowy December morning, no one celebrated Daniel's defeat. They celebrated something far more important. A little boy no longer had to carry burdens that never should have belonged to him in the first place. And sometimes, that kind of quiet victory changes the world far more deeply than any triumph announced with applause. The first morning in Gordon Pennington's home felt almost unreal to Emmett. He woke before sunrise, just as he always had. For several seconds he lay perfectly still, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling. His first thought wasn't about where he was. It was whether he had overslept and missed school. His second thought was even stranger. He wondered if there would be enough food left in the kitchen. Old habits don't disappear overnight. Even after the world changes around you. Emmett quietly climbed out of bed, folded his blanket with careful precision, and made the bed exactly the way his grandmother had taught him years earlier. When he opened the bedroom door, the smell stopped him. Fresh pancakes. Bacon. Coffee. Warm biscuits. For a long moment, he simply stood there breathing. Not because he was hungry. Because he had forgotten what a home smelled like in the morning. Downstairs, Eileen Spencer, Gordon's longtime housekeeper, looked up from the stove and smiled. Good morning, sweetheart. Emmett smiled politely. Good morning, ma'am. I wasn't sure what you liked, so I made a little of everything. He looked at the table. There was enough food for 10 people. His eyes widened. Is someone else coming? Eileen laughed softly. No. It's just breakfast. Emmett slowly sat down. He reached for a single pancake. Then stopped. Instead of eating, he quietly cut it in half. Then into quarters. Eileen watched without saying anything. Finally she asked. Honey. Why are you doing that? Emmett looked embarrassed. I'm trying to make it last. The room fell completely silent. Before Eileen could answer, Gordon quietly walked into the dining room. He had heard every word. Without making a scene, he pulled out a chair and sat beside Emmett. There will still be breakfast tomorrow. Emmett looked down. And the day after that. Another pause. And the day after that. The little boy nodded, but Gordon could tell he didn't quite believe it yet. Trust, like healing, arrived one day at a time. Later that afternoon, Gordon took Emmett shopping. Not to an expensive boutique. Just to an ordinary department store. The sales associate smiled warmly. What can I help you find today? Before Gordon could answer, Emmett spoke first. I only need one pair of jeans. Gordon looked at him. What about shirts? I can wash the same one. What about a winter coat? This one's still okay. The coat had holes near both sleeves. One zipper pocket no longer closed. Its insulation had nearly disappeared. Yet Emmett genuinely believed it was good enough. Gordon knelt beside him. Emmett. When something wears out, it isn't wasteful to replace it. The little boy thought about that for several seconds. No one had ever explained it that way before. They left the store carrying 2 small bags. Not because Gordon couldn't afford more. Because Emmett refused to choose anything unnecessary. That evening, Gordon drove to Maple Grove Care Center. Margaret was waiting beside the window. When Emmett walked into the room wearing his new blue winter coat, she covered her mouth with both hands. My handsome boy. Emmett hurried across the room and gently hugged her. I got pancakes. Margaret laughed through tears. That's wonderful. And tomorrow, I'm getting pancakes again. She looked toward Gordon. Neither adult spoke. Neither needed to. Margaret understood exactly what those simple words really meant. For the first time in a very long time. Her grandson believed there would be a tomorrow worth planning for. As they prepared to leave, Margaret reached into her bedside drawer. She removed a small, weathered children's Bible with Emmett's name written inside the cover. I've been saving this. She placed it into his hands. Not because it's expensive. It isn't. But because your grandfather carried it every day. Emmett held it carefully. I'll take good care of it. I know you will. On the drive home, Emmett quietly opened the front cover. Inside, tucked between 2 worn pages, was a faded photograph of himself as a little boy standing between his mother and his grandparents. On the back, his grandfather had written only one sentence. Kindness is the only thing that grows larger every time you give it away. Gordon glanced toward the passenger seat and smiled. Without realizing it, 3 generations had just placed the same lesson into one little boy's hands. And soon, he would spend the rest of his life passing it on. 25 years passed more quickly than either Gordon or Emmett could have imagined. The frightened little boy who had once waited outside Miller's bakery hoping someone might leave half a sandwich behind had grown into a man respected across Ohio for something that had nothing to do with wealth. People knew him because of Holloway House. It wasn't the largest children's charity in the state. It wasn't the richest. But everyone who walked through its doors found the same 3 things. A warm meal. A clean bed. And someone willing to listen before asking questions. Above the front entrance hung a simple wooden sign. Everyone deserves one more chance. Those words had become the heart of everything Emmett built. Every new employee heard the same story during orientation. Not the story of a billionaire. Not the story of a courtroom. The story of one hungry little boy who had discovered that dignity was something no amount of hardship could ever take away unless you surrendered it yourself. One snowy December afternoon, Emmett was preparing to leave the office when he noticed a small figure sitting alone outside the neighborhood bakery across the street. The little boy couldn't have been older than 10. His backpack rested beside him. His jacket was too thin for the weather. He wasn't asking anyone for money. He wasn't bothering customers. He was simply watching people finish their lunches. Emmett stopped walking. For a long moment. He simply stood there. 25 years disappeared. He wasn't seeing the little boy anymore. He was seeing himself. He quietly crossed the street and walked into the bakery. A few minutes later he came back carrying 2 bowls of hot chicken soup and a basket of fresh bread. Instead of handing the food to the boy, he sat down beside him. Neither of them spoke immediately. The little boy looked nervous. Emmett smiled. "My name's Emmett." The boy relaxed a little. "I'm Caleb." "It's nice to meet you, Caleb." They ate together in comfortable silence. No pity. No awkward questions. Just 2 people sharing a meal on a cold winter afternoon. After several minutes, Emmett reached into his wallet. Inside, protected behind a clear sleeve, rested an old $100 bill. The same bill Gordon Pennington had once offered him. It had remained there for 25 years. Never spent. Never forgotten. Behind it rested another treasure. A faded white business card. On the front, Gordon Pennington. On the back, written in blue ink more than half a century earlier. "If you ever truly need help, call me." No questions asked. Emmett looked at the card for several quiet seconds. Then he turned it over. Using the pen he always carried in his jacket pocket, he wrote beneath Gordon's handwriting. "Now you can call me too." He smiled. Removed his own business card. Clipped the 2 cards together. Then handed them to Caleb. The little boy looked confused. "Why are you giving me these?" Emmett looked toward the bakery window where warm light spilled onto the snowy sidewalk. Then he answered with the same quiet sincerity Gordon had once shown him. "Because someone believed in me before I knew how to believe in myself." Caleb carefully accepted the cards with both hands. "I'll give them back." Emmett smiled. "I hope you never have to." Across the street, a bronze bench stood outside Holloway House. Most people walked past it without noticing the small bronze plaque attached beneath the seat. It read, "In memory of Beatrice Holloway, whose kindness changed one little boy. In honor of Gordon Pennington, who chose to pass that kindness forward. And for every child who discovers that hope is only one compassionate stranger away." A few months later, Gordon Pennington passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 88. Among the many letters found on his desk was one addressed simply, "For Emmett." Inside was only a single page. It read, "You once embarrassed an old man by refusing $100. The truth is, you gave me something worth far more than money that afternoon. You reminded me that character cannot be purchased, generosity cannot be forced, and hope survives because ordinary people choose kindness when no one is watching. If Holloway House continues after we're both gone, then neither of us will ever truly leave this world." Years have passed since that little boy quietly pushed a $100 bill back into an old man's hand. Looking back now, I no longer believe that was the most important moment in this story. The most important moment came every single time someone chose to continue that act of kindness instead of letting it end with themselves. Money changes circumstances. Compassion changes generations. Somewhere tonight, another hungry child may still be waiting outside a small bakery, hoping the world has not forgotten them. And perhaps, because one little boy once said, "I didn't do it for money," another light will stay on, another door will open, and another life will begin again.